Quilt Charity Quilt-A-Long. It is our third week of skills that we need to learn to be able to make a quilt. So this week we are going to review our pattern, and I'm going to be showing you review a little bit about the cutting out, sewing our strip sets, pressing, sewing with a 1/4 inch seam as we continue on in our pattern. So here we have this pattern, and I wrote it, and my friend Julia Wenzel, Briar Hill Designs, she used all of her amazing computer skills to draw this up for me, which I'm so grateful. So on this pattern, we have our the finished size of our quilt, and in this quilt I just included the one size, and I can show later if you want to make a larger quilt what you would do to increase that size. And then I have included the materials that required, so your rotary cutter and all those things that we did in week 1. And then here I have our materials. And so today I'm going to be using this awesome line, High Adventure 2 by Riley Blake. It's a really fun outdoorsy design. And the fabric was donated by Nuts for Bolts, etc. from Red Deer, who I used to work for. Lovely company. And we have, okay, I'm going to delete some of that. Okay, so in our materials, so our shopping list, if we wanted to use 3 fabrics, we can. In this example that I'm using, I actually, this was a project I was working with on for her, and so I had some leftover fabrics. So what I did was it will say here your A, B, and C fabric. And so your A is what you're going to be using for your 8-inch squares. So these are the 8-inch squares that go in your 9 patch. And then there's the B and C fabric, and they are our 3-inch strips. Now, because I'm using up fabric that I had been using in the past, I have this, the browns, and if you look closely, the browns are all slightly, these 2 are the same, and these 2 are the same, the teepees and then the print. However, because they're similar tone, I'm going to be pairing them up, and so it just kind of gives some diversity in our quilting. And this way it helps me use up my scraps and using up all that fabric. So you can see that it's going to add some variety to our pattern. I did the same thing when it came to these 8-inch squares. I again have this print, and then I have the teepees. And so I'm changing that up so they don't all have to be the same. So again, if you want to be using your stash, also if you have a layer cake that you want to use up, that's totally fine. And I have this layer cake here from the beautiful fabrics. And so if you wanted to do this for your 8-inch squares, and then you're gonna have to trim these into 3-inch squares separately, and then you can make your 9 patches from that. So that would be a more scrappy look, which takes just a little bit more effort and time when you're putting your quilt together. As you get more confidence and abilities in the quilting, that will come. And so I do recommend that you use fabric from the same line. So a designer will design a fabric line, and so the whole line will be presented to you. And what's really great about that is that they all coordinate. So whatever you're using, they will go together. So that kind of takes out some of the guesswork for you if that's a place where you feel a little bit uncomfortable. We talked about that last week. All right, so now we have our cutting instructions. So I'm just going to read these through with you because I know for me, sometimes it feels like you're speaking a different language and it's a little confusing. And so I'm going to just read these with you. So it says cut fabric A, so that's this red fabric, into 8-inch squares. You require 12 of those squares. Now, I explained this in the blog post, but sometimes it helps just to have it explained a little bit differently. So you're going to cut 8 inches by the width of fabric. So you're going to take the length of your yardage, and you're going to cut one big strip, 8 inches wide. Okay, so now the width of your fabric is about 42, 43 inches, okay? So you're going to have this long strip, and then you're going to cut 8-inch, you're going to subcut it 8-inch squares from that. So that way you've got your you can get your squares out of that. So instead of having to cut that 8 inches, if you just do one long strip and then you subcut, just like I showed last week, then you're going to have your squares, and that works out really well. So that's what that means. Cut 8 inches by width of fabric, subcut 4 squares from each strip of width of fabric or width of fabric. You will need 3 strips in total. So you have 3 strips that are 8 inches wide, and then you take your ruler and then you subcut those 8-inch squares, and that will give you a minimum of the 12. You're going to have a few extra, and that's okay. One of the things that I did with the extras is I actually cut them into 4-inch squares. So I divided that 8-inch, and then I can show you. So now I have a collection here of all these really cute little 4-inch squares. And so I can this is one of my scrap management tips, is when you have a line of fabric and you're using it all, I like to use it all. I do have my scrap bins that I have above me, and they're in different colors, and that's helpful. But I figure if I have this many squares, then I could even do something with this, and whatever fabric I have left over, I can then just cut those into 4-inch squares and put a cute little quilt together as well. And I do have one free pattern coming out that has a 4x4 and then a more solid block. And so that can be paired with another fabric or a solid or whatever you want. But that's just a little scrap management tip. All right, so coming back to our reading instructions here. So now now I have all of my 8-inch squares out of fabric A, which if you technically is A1, A2. So I'm combining the 2 reds, but they'll work together. Now fabric B, cut 3 inches by width of fabric. Same thing, long strip, and I'm actually just going to be able to keep this long strip. And you might notice that I've cut off the selvage edges already because I don't need that. So cut 3 inches by width of fabric, and I want 5 of those strips. And yeah, cut the selvage edges off. So I've got my 5 that are fabric B, and then my fabric C is cut 3 inches by width of fabric, cut 4. Okay, so that's super simple. And I did forget to include the binding on that. Oh, that's interesting that I forgot that. So for the binding, you're going to want 4 2.5-inch by width of fabric. So that's what these ones are. I'm going to include that in the pattern. I'm going to update that pattern and send it out. So these, I decided just to use some of these fabrics for so you need 4 width of fabric, 2.5 inches wide. And I'm going to show you how to do the binding later on. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my strip sets. So I have a CBC, and now I'm going to take, so my C is the lighter color, CBC. Alright, so that's my 1 strip set, and I'm going to take my Wonder Clip, I love these Wonder Clips, and I'm just going to put it on in this section here, and that's my 1 strip set, and I'm going to do that twice. Okay, so CBC, and I've got this strip set, and I can either put it on the top or I can fold it in half this way, however I want to do that. Just as long as you have everything organized and put together. So it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to have, so that's my light, dark, light, and then my dark, light, dark. And so that's my next set. And so since that's all I need, I don't really need to use the Wonder Clip for that. And then this is for my binding, so I'm just going to put this aside. It's there. Okay, so now it says, to create the first strip set, CBC, sew strip C to B. Now sew CB to C. It will look like the picture below. Press the seams facing outside as indicated. Make 1 set. Okay, so what I'm going to do with that is when we're sewing, a few things about our thread selection. Normally, our thread, we have a smaller stitch. Mine is an average about 3, but every machine is different. But you're going to experiment, and I kind of talk about this, is that You don't want your stitch to be very long because when you open your fabric, it will kind of stretch out, right? And we want to have really little stitches to keep it secure when it's opened up. Now, mostly how I press my quilting is I press them flat to one side, so both seams go over, so that does help with that. But I like to have a fairly small stitch just to keep the quilt really secure. Remember, these quilts are made to be loved and cherished and used and worn and just held, and so we want it to be well constructed and put together really well. So when we're stitching them together, we want to make sure that's a nice tight stitch. It doesn't need to be too crazy, too tight, because actually that could add bulk when you're pressing and you're folding over. So keep that in mind as well. Now, one of the things that we need to do is for accuracy, because you're putting all these pieces together, and so we need to use a 1/4 inch seam. So if you use an 1/8 of an inch seam and a 1/2 an inch seam, then you're going to be able to, that's going to put your quilt out of whack, and we don't want that, because if you have an 1/8 of an inch over 3 times, that's over 3/4 of an inch, right? And so that's going to cause you problems, and your quilt's going to kind of go wonky, and we don't want that. We want to do the best we can. So one of the tips that I have is that we need to test our stitching. So on this metal plate here on our machine, there are the stitch guides. Most machines have this. So I have 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch. And so I can use this gauge to help me. There are other tools that you can use. I know that Lori Holt Cute Cuts has really a great one. It's a kind of a flower, and it gives you that guide, and you set it up and you secure it to the flat of your machine. Other people have what's called a 1/4 inch foot, and so they have kind of a little edge on, this is our foot, and so that guides that along. But I just saw a post today actually of a tape measure, and so this woman had 2 different tape measures plus her mat, and they were all off. And so depending on your manufacturer or whatever, we don't always know if everything is completely accurate. So one of my tests that I like to do, and especially to develop my skills, is I will take a sample piece. So I'm going to take one of my little blocks here. So I'm going to take these blocks, and I'm going to do red because then I can have a little bit of a contrast with thread color. And so I'm going to put them like as if we were sewing them together. I'm going to try to do a different pattern here, just so when we're going to sew them together, so I'm going to put the good sides facing each other, and then I line up my edges here. That's really important. And then I'm going to put it through here. Now, sometimes we have our feed dogs under here, and they push that fabric forward. Sometimes it gets a little bit hard to get it going, and so people will have a little like starter piece, and so it's just a little piece of fabric. Like I could, for example, snip off. This is one of the bindings that I had. So I think it's called a leader. Pretty sure it's called a leader guide. And so I can actually put this leader guide first, and I put it right on the center of the fabric, and so that's already gone past. So we get it going, and now we're going to just butt this up. Then we're going to butt them together, and you're going to guide this along, and we want to make sure it's as even as possible, right? And so I'm just kind of guiding it like I'm driving. I'm always looking ahead of where I'm going, and I'm going to follow that down and then bring it off. Now, what's going to happen, and so then what you do with this leader piece here is that you can just leave this by your machine, and so the next time that you go to sewing, then that can go through. So you can put this through like 50 times. It's just to kind of help you out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler, which is right here, my Cute Cuts ruler, and I'm going to line up my seam, I can do it however I want. If it works better from the top, and then I'm going to actually look through. It's nice that it's clear, and I'm going to make sure that I'm actually getting a 1/4 inch seam, and to make sure for accuracy. So I want you to check on that. So if it's right on, then you know that whatever you just did. So I'm lining up my edge of my fabric with my 1/4 inch seam that's indicated on my sewing machine. If that's working for you, then that's perfect. You know that that is accurate. If it's not, you're going to want to make sure that you are going to find you're going to find the way you can. Some people will get like a wasabi tape or masking tape or something, and they will realign that, and they'll bring it down on their machine so that they have more of a surface to be feeding their fabric through, and it'll be nice and straight. And so that's really important. And now when you have your 1/4 inch seam and you're okay with that, then you do make that mental note, and then you've got that ready to go. So when you are sewing a strip set like I'm going to be showing you now, you have to remember this is 40 plus inches, so it's quite the length. So you're going to, now the other thing to remember is directional fabric, if that's going to make a difference or not. So keep that in mind. This one is not directional, this one is directional. So that is important to keep in mind. So what I'm going to do is, I find that if you put the lighter piece of fabric on top, it's a little bit easier to see the bottom, right? So line that up. And sometimes it helps if you're piecing to put to press them together. And I find that if you press them together, that fabric is warm and they'll stay nicer together. Some people pin. I'm kind of past pinning, but you do what works for you. So what I tend to do is when I'm putting the strip sets down on my machine, I always want to see a little bit of that bottom one kind of peeking through, so I know that they're lined up properly. So sometimes I just kind of tease back that fabric if I feel like it's going over to the edge a little bit much. I just take my nails and just kind of bring it over a little bit, and then I can secure it with my right hand and just kind of hold it. Like, you don't want to have a death grip on it or anything, but just kind of, you're just guiding it along and you're keeping it nice and straight. So that is really important. So as you go, and every time you need to readjust your hand, you stop your machine. I always have my machine at needle down position, and then you just reline. And that's kind of nice because it's tethered, right? Like, it's down, so you can really line that up, which I like to do. And you just guide it along, keeping it lined up. I need to reposition my hand, no big deal. I've got that down. Okay, and so as you can see, it's not a race. You don't have to have it finished by any time. I have a very fast machine, and so which I really appreciate for fast piecing. And I just keep going. Line it up. And you're going to just check your accuracy, and you can just bring this up, keep going, and just make sure that that's going to be accurate, okay? So that's a really important way just to make sure that you're doing all right, because sometimes you can have bowing in that if you're not accurate enough. Now, this is when I press it, and then, but I'm just going to show you then, so you put your next piece down, so you open this one up, you press it, and now this one you're actually pressing, you're going to press to the dark side, okay? And there's a really important reason why you're doing that, because we're going to lock our stitches, our seams. So again, we're just going to do this, and I will sew it up, and then I will show you how to press in our next section. Hi, it's Dara Thomason of Stitch Quilting Co. And in this section I'll be showing you my strip sets that I made and showing you the importance of pressing and what side to press it on. So All right, so we go back to our pattern and we're making 2 of these strip sets, CBC, and 1 BCB. And so, or you can do it the other way around. I did them the other way. So this is what the strip set looks like. Now, I need to remember that when it's this way, you have directional fabrics. You need to make sure that that's going to all be in the same direction. So I created these 2 strip sets and then this alternating one, the dark. So how we do this is I'm going to subcut them into 3-inch sets. So just move my sewing machine over so you can see carefully. All right, so just before I do that, I'm going to explain about the ironing. These I'm going to press the dark side, and so quite often I have the Star Wars thing that goes through my mind, press the dark side. And quite often you do want to press the dark side just because if you can see through, if you have the seam coming on this side, you can actually see that bump and you can see it out, so it doesn't look as nice. It's a lot crisp and clean. So that's one of the reasons to do that. The other reason is we're going to lock our seams. So this cream part, now when I'm pressing, it's kind of challenging in my configuration of pressing, but what I'm going to show you how I press. So when I've sewn my strips, and then I'm going to take my iron, I'm going to press it, and all I'm going to do simply is just kind of give it a warm hug. That's what I call it. So I'm going to apply that heat to the fabric, and I'm just going to keep it nice and warm. And then what I'm going to do is once I have I'm going to do that the whole side, and then I'm going to press it to the side that I want it. Now I want it to go on the inside. So then I'm going to take my iron, and then I'm just going to nudge it over. So I just kind of nudge, and I'm just going to ease into that. Now, because there is a little bit of a ledge here on the seam, I don't want it to kind of fold over on this side and come, so I want it to be nice and flat on here. So I kind of nudge this over, and then I'm going to press. And so I go through that whole side, and then when I'm finished, this is obviously not on right now, when I'm finished, I'm going to put it face down, and then I'm going to make sure that these seams are nice and flat. Another way to assure that that is good is I'm going to take my ruler, and I will line up my ruler this way. So I can line up my ruler this way, and as I have it flat on my mat or my table, then I'm just going to bring this down, and I'm just going to make sure that I've got really nice even strips, okay? That's really helpful. Even putting it on the mat and just laying it there, you can see it using your ruler, all the lines on the mat, that it's going to be even. So that's important too. Now one of my little tricks to cut quickly, is I actually fold this in half, okay? So I'm going to fold my strip set in half. I don't want to go too bulky, like I wouldn't want to put other strip sets there, just because once you have too much bulk, and then of course you have your seams, right? And so when you have the seams, the ruler, what happens is it kind of rocks. Like if you imagine a car that's high centered, it rocks, right? It's the same kind of thing with the seams. So if you have, like right now I'm doubling up on my seams. If I have more than that the ruler's gonna kind of back and forth, and I'm not gonna have as much accuracy when I'm cutting. So I'm going to line up my strip. Okay, so I'm going to just show you. So I'm going to line this up on here, and it's lined up there. And now you can notice here this is uneven. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it as even as possible, kind of lining it up, and then I'm going to take my ruler, and I'm going to use this line to center, and I'm just going to trim this part off. So I'm just going to grab my rotary cutter, and I've placed this nice and flat. I have half my hand on the ruler, half my hand on the mat. And actually I don't even really need to worry so much about lining it up on the lines on the mat, because all I'm doing right now is I'm just getting a nice straight edge. So remember, keep your hand on the mat, and take off your little trimmings, and then you're good to go. So now what you're going to do, and because I don't have, I can't really get that angle correctly, I'm just going to show you. So now this edge is nice and flat. So I'm going to actually just bring my ruler over, and I want a 3-inch strip set. So now I can line up my 3-inch line here for my ruler onto my mat, and now I'm going to use this line on the other side of my ruler to cut. And I'm actually going to keep doing that as I go. And because I'm using my fabric as my guide, I'm not so worried about the lines on the grid. What I do like about the lines on the grid is that, I'm going to show you what I like to do, is I will line up my ruler on the other grids. So I'm going to use it as a guide, so I'm making sure this is like nice and straight on there, okay? So these lines on my ruler are going to line up with these lines on the mat. And that just is kind of an extra way for me to make sure that I'm having some accuracy when I'm cutting. All right, so now that I have this lined up, I've got all of these guys lined up mostly. I'll just kind of adjust this a touch. Okay, so once that's lined up, I'm going to hold my ruler down, my hand, part of my hand on the ruler, part on there. I'm going to disengage the blade, and then I'm going to bring it 3.5 now. And so I bring this, oops, I didn't listen to my advice. Okay, so, and I'm just going to slide this down, and it's off, okay? So now I've got my first, so isn't that amazing? So instead of having to cut out all these little individual 3-inch strips, I'm now able to just do it. So now this is actually part of my, this is 2/3 done of my 9 patch. Isn't that awesome? I love it. So now we have those ones there. And so I'm going to continue to cut up here on my strip sets, and then so I can show you, but I just so that we can, I'm just so excited to show you the magic. I'm going to take my other strip set, I'm going to do the same thing that I explained. I'm going to line this up, and this it's really important that when you are laying this out that it's nice and flat, and it's not leaning off of anything, it's not hanging off of anything, that you want it to be as flat and straight as possible. So now I'm just going to trim this off. And that's all nice and clean. I'm going to slide my ruler down. I'm going to line it up at my 3-inch mark. Line this all up. And I'm going to cut it. Now, this is the beauty. So now we have our 9 patch. Ta-da! So, all right, so here I have the 2 pieces, all right? And so now we're gonna put them together, so good sides together. Now you can really see what's gonna happen. You have this seam going up and this seam going down, and they're gonna lock together. And so what I'm going to do is, I love these clover pins. They're nice and thin. They have the glass top, so if I am pressing, they don't melt. So now I'm just going to anchor it in here. So because I put the needle through that seam, I can look on both sides and see that that is good to go. And then I'm going to lock those seams, the same thing. See how lovely that is? I'm going to take another pin. I love this clover magnet. It's so handy because all the pins stay together where they need to be. So now that I have this lined up, when I'm piecing it, I am going to be in good shape. So I'm going to bring it back to my machine, and then I'm going to lay this flat, and then this will just sew up my 1/4-inch seam. If I need my leader fabric, my machine's pretty good for that. And I'm come along. So I like to think about my, when I'm locking my seams, it's kind of like your pivot. And so you bring this down, pull my pin out before I, okay. I'm going to line this up. Just pull out my needle here and my pin. Nice and even to the end. And you're gonna see some really nice, perfect points here. Isn't that awesome? And it's because of the way that we pressed it. And so then, of course, this is our third one. We put it together and we do the same thing. And that is our 9-patch. I'm going to share a tip with you on how to make your piecing a little bit quicker. So what we're doing is we're just it's called chain piecing. So you can see here I have this string of pieces. So I'm putting my sets together first, and then I'll add my third component on this side. But what I'm doing is I'm going to do my 13 all in a row, and then once those are all sewn up, then I take my chain of piecing, take it over to the ironing board and press all of those at once. And then I can choose to snip it if I want, and then start again for my third section. All right, so there's some tips for chain piecing. It makes things way fast and speedy. So happy quilting. Okay, so I'm just going to talk to you quickly about, all right, I'm just going to speak to you about how to square up your block. So this block needs to be 8 inches by 8 inches. So I'm just going to try to get a little bit more specific here, zooming in. So here I have this green line here, this blue line, it's a 1/4 inch seam. And so I'm going to disregard this part right now because I want to line up my block on this part here, this line. So if I hold it up, so here's my line. Now the other thing I really love about these Cute Cut rulers is on this part there's actually like a grippy texture, so it has more security when you have it in. Now if it's hard to see, then all I'm going to do is just line it up on this outside part. So I know I have these as my guide. So I'm going to just straighten this part up here. And if I just lift it up and straighten it like that. So I am using these lines on the cut ruler as a guide. And then I'm going to put it on here. So one of the things I like about this ruler is having these flowers kind of as a guideline to find my center. And for some reason the camera, I don't feel like it's showing it as clearly as I would like. But what you want to do, actually I'm pretty much spot on. Ha, how good is that? So I just have this line here and here. So I'm a little bit off right there, just a little bit over. And also right here, I'm just a little bit off. So to straighten that up, I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to straighten with my ruler, and then once that edge is done, then I would come back and I would just remeasure that. So then bring it along here and then trim this part up. So that's how you square up. I'm going to be doing something very similar to this when it comes to squaring up my quilt at the very end before I put my binding on. But this is a really fabulous tool. The Cute Cuts come in lots of different sizes. This one is the 10.5. I do have the 4.5 one, which is fantastic for little pieces. If you don't have the square up ruler, I'd recommend you have one. You can do that. The same thing with the this ruler. But you're depending more so on the grid of the mat. So that's something to consider. All right, there you are in squaring up your block. And here is our 9 patch. If you look carefully, it's actually the opposite of how it's supposed to be. In the pattern, because I have made double of the outside being the white, that would be we need twice as many of those as we do for the middle. So in anyways, this is how you do it, but technically for the pattern, the outside corner should be the white, just so that you don't make the same mistake I did. How cute is that? I love having the diversity of the different brown patches within the white that will keep it all together. So I'm really excited about you putting those together. So it says subcut the sets by 3 inches. Each set will yield 13 sets. Now to assemble the 9 patch blocks, take 2 BCB sets to 1 CBC set and sew them together, making sure they are alternating color. So we did that. And now you get to do that more and more. So here we have, this is the layout of our quilt. And so we have 5, 8, 10, 13. So you're going to have 13 9 patches. So you're going to do this 13 more times, or 12 more times, I guess. And then we're going to put that together. So just to review, in this section, and this week's homework is, if you hadn't cut out already, you need to do that. You sew up, you check your 1/4 inch seam, which now you know how to do that. And we are doing our pressing. So when you press it down the seams together. So you would just press it just as it is. So I always give it a nice warm hug, I call it. And then you press your dark, you always press to the dark side. So here I pressed to the dark side, so those both went in this way. And on this other strip set, I pressed to the dark side, so that means I pressed outwards. And the arrows on the pattern are really helpful. So those go on the outside. Then we talked about checking our seams. So after we've pressed, it's a good idea to lay it on the mat and put a clear ruler over top just to make sure that it's nice and even throughout. Now remember, this is fabric. It does move and shift a little. And so it's not like wood, and it does kind of move a little bit. I had a client once that brought me a quilt, and she pressed so much, and she was so worried about it. She literally pressed she frayed the fabric. The seam like traveled, the stitching traveled and like frayed it. And so I had to do some repair work. So just, relax your shoulders. You're not pressing in there just to manipulate the fabric. You just want it to be nice and flat and just, relax. One of the tools that I really like using when I'm pressing is a product called Best Press. It has lots of really nice smells, and it's a starch, but it doesn't have the vegetable base like potato starch does in like the spray can ones. And because they have a vegetable base like that, it can attract insects and bugs if you don't wash and use your quilts very often. So I would definitely recommend using a product like Best Press for your piecing. And if you really want to get that super accurate seam, then that is really helpful. And then we talked about subcutting our strip sets. We talked about assembling our 9 patches, wherever that 9 patch went, and pressing those. Oh, I didn't talk about that. So so here's your 9 patch, and then you can press depending on, you can do the darks. See, the problem is there's 2 dark sides on here and 2 dark sides down there. So you would just press to the dark side because there's more dark than there is light, and vice versa. So when you do it for the pattern, and if you decide to make the white corners of a lighter side, I should say lighter, then you would press it so that you don't see it. Okay, so it can be pressed in the middle. So when it's that way, it's not as important. Now you're gonna make, so then that's that part. And so your homework, of course, is to make 13 of these 9 patches. You're going to have 12 of these cut. So next week, week 4 already, we are going to talk about deciding on our layout. I have this really cool system of keeping our layout Some really great tips of making sure that we like the layout and some surefire ways to make sure you're happy with that. And also picking up the layout and then bringing it to the machine and then having it the same way that you started out with. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about sewing those together and pressing that. Week 5, of course, is basting. So we're going to talk about a variety of ways to baste our quilt. And then we're going to get to my favorite part, the pre-motion quilting. It's going to be awesome. Week 6 is squaring up our quilt and preparing our binding. And then week 7 is going to be making a label and sharing who we're going to be donating our quilts to and those experiences that we have. So thank you so much for joining me. Again, please share this with any of your friends who are wanting to learn how to quilt and who you think they could benefit. Also, please keep sharing is caring, so please spread the word of the quilt drive that I have. So just once again, for every quilt that you donate, you can donate to anyone you want, any place, any person. All I ask is that you tag me in that picture, or if you're uncomfortable about having public show of appreciation, just DM me, direct message me and just let me know. I'll put your name in the draw. And so for every quilt that is donated, I'm going to put a 5-inch square on my design wall. And my end goal is to make a pixel heart quilt, which I believe there's 279 pixels. So that's only 279 quilts. We could totally do this. And then at the end, when the quilt's all put together, I'm going to have a lot of fun quilting it on my long arm. And then I'm going to put that up for a draw for all the people that put their name in. So you could possibly have a chance to win a pixel heart quilt. All right, happy quilting, everyone. Until next week. And if also, remember, go to my blog, www.stitchedquiltingco.com, for a detailed written description of the instructions that I just gave on the YouTube video. Thanks so much. Happy quilting.